The world all around us is falling apart. That which we knew as true is no longer true. That which we once knew as right is today wrong. We stand watching, frozen with fear, clothed in the embodiment of silence, murmuring, somebody needs to do something. Did you ever stop to think that somebody's you and me? We will now share an interview including Epic News and Zuby, an independent rapper and artist, with you on the Pandemic of Cowardice.
There is a pandemic of cowardice that is leading people to censor themselves and abandon their values in the face of cancel culture. According to Zuby, an independent rapper and author, we speak with Zuby about how this system of control works, how it is controlling society, and how to break free.
Hey, Zuby, thanks for being on Crossroads.
No doubt, man. Happy to be here.
Now Zuby, I would say that the conflict America has right now is really twofold. When it comes to, I think, this rise in socialism, what it has always represented partly is really a war against traditional values. You can go back to Marx and communism, and that's really what he was talking about, the redefining of like human nature and human culture. I would say that guys like you're kind of at the forefront of this culture war in a lot of sense, and speaking out against the craziness coming out, the transgenderism we were on a lot, talking about lies in the media, ridiculousness of the mandates. It really, at its heart, I think, is a culture war. What would you tell people what it's like facing this and facing hit pieces and facing attacks, but holding your ground?
It's a lot easier than people think it is. I think a lot of people shy away from all of this, and that's why it continues to get worse. One of the things I hear so often from people is, the world's gone crazy. Why has the world gone crazy? Suddenly, I've woken up and it seems like people have lost their mind. Why has it gone so far? How's this happened? It's happened because most people have let it happen.
That's deep.
It's happened because most people have let it happen. People don't like this when I say this. People don't like it when I say that we have a pandemic of cowardice, because nobody likes to see themselves as a coward. Everyone wants to think that they are brave and they are courageous and, they're fighting the fight, but most people aren't. Most people are not being censored by the government or even censored by big tech or censored by social media. They're being censored by themselves. They're censoring themselves. And in my country, the UK, in the USA, in Canada, across the entire Anglosphere, across many parts of the Western world, over the past 10 years, we have had this pandemic of cowardice, and people are unwilling to say things in many cases that are objectively true. Everyone knows what a man is. Everyone knows what a woman is. There's no one who doesn't know. There's people who pretend they don't. There's people who know but are afraid to say the answer. And why is that? Yes, they are afraid of repercussions, but just like cowardice is a habit, courage is also a habit, and both of them are contagious. When people around you start acting like cowards, it can affect you and cause other people to behave that way. When one person stands up, starts speaking out and using their platform to either state their opinions or to state objective facts, it encourages other people to do the same. I know for a fact that I have encouraged thousands, if not millions of people out there in this world to be a little bit more bold, a little bit more courageous. I'm not talking about being a radical or pushing anything sort of extreme. I'm talking about common sense. I'm talking about simply being willing to say what you believe to be true, say what is true, have conversations, have debates, have discussions, stand up and say no when someone is trying to force something on you that you don't want to go along with, whether it's a mask mandate or it's a vax mandate, or it's trying to force you to call people by made-up pronouns, or it's to do this or to do that. If you're not on board with it, you can say no. You don't have to go along with all the nonsense. And if you do, that's how you get to where we are now. It's not simply because of activists. It only works in the face when people refuse to stand up. Right? That's where it is. So my message is, I don't want to sound like I'm outright chastising people here. Maybe I am to some degree. But this has been going on for years and years and years. And actually it's declining. It's getting worse. And so more people need to be bold and take a stand. I've said to people, you can't outsource your courage, right? You can take inspiration from people and other people can motivate you to be a bit more emboldened. But ultimately, it comes down to each individual and their circle of influence. And if people are concerned about the direction the USA is heading, then the sane people in this country, and most Americans are sane, right? Most Americans are not on board with the most extreme and radical and bizarre notions that are floating around out there, whether it's women having penises or men menstruating and giving birth or whatever other nonsense is going on out there. Over 90% of people don't believe that. But those people need to be willing to say something. Otherwise, a silent majority is weak when faced with a vocal minority.
Well, and that's what people talk about, that there really is a silent majority.
It's not helpful.
But how long does that majority need to remain silent?
A silent majority may as well not exist. Silent majority is the biggest cope in the world. People like saying silent majority because it makes them think, oh, well, somehow by magic, we're somehow going to turn how can you win a fight you don't fight? Yeah. How can you win a debate when you don't speak? You could have a debate and one person's just spouting off the goofiest, most ludicrous ideas. And if you just sit there...
I think they are.
Yeah, and if you just sit there silently and nod, then they win the debate. If you go into a boxing ring with your hands tied behind your back and you refuse to throw a punch or even block, they're going to beat you, even if they're a terrible opponent. So the silent majority doesn't matter, right? If the majority... Here's one for you. Do we have a silent majority or a silenced majority? I think there's a silenced majority.
Yes.
Right? And as long as people stay silent, then that vocal minority doesn't matter if it's only 1% of the population. They are very vocal. They are very bold. They're not afraid to say their goofy opinions. So why should you be afraid to say your sane one?
That's deep. They're not afraid to say the craziest things I think I've ever heard in my life, things I never thought I'd hear in my entire existence. Like the wackiest things you can possibly... You have guys talking about assassinating Supreme Court justices on Twitter, and the left doesn't care about it. You have guys talking about, there's no such thing as men and women on Twitter, and that people just stay silent on it.
Honestly,
right?
Okay, let's... I said we wouldn't get into the transgender thing, but what percentage of the world's population do you think believes that men can give birth?
Probably not many.
Around the globe, 8 billion people, what percent of people do you think believe that?
I'd say actually believe it, maybe 2%. Coerced to believe it, maybe 20%, I'd say.
20% globally, not just USA?
This is specifically an American, Canadian, and like a Western European issue.
So at a push, I'd say that's very liberal, but let's say 80%. Let's say 80% know that it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? How is that 20% winning?
Good point.
And you brought up, more interesting, that 20%, you brought in the 2%. Yeah. Right? That 2% is forcing the 20%, who's now forcing the 80%. Right? And I think this is a good example, as annoying and silly as this conversation can be. If we can't agree with the most basic aspects of objective reality and biology, then how can anything else even function? People can have all sorts of different opinions and ideas in this world. And it's part of what makes things interesting. But if someone is saying that, this table in front of us is navy blue, okay? If I am insisting that this is yellow, and I'm trying to force everyone else, it's not enough for me to believe it's yellow. I must force you to believe it's yellow. If you don't agree that this is yellow, you're now a bigot. You're now a bad guy. Maybe I even want to get the law involved to prosecute you until you say this tablecloth is yellow. And then I want you to go out and tell everyone else who can see it's blue to say, no, it's yellow. This is where we are now. It's not about tolerance. It's not about empathy. It's not about compassion. It's not about making room for people who perhaps do not typically fit into certain traditional roles. That's not what the discussion or debate is about. It's one of force and coercion, right? If it's like, hey, look, there's a very, very small percentage of people who feel like, they're more comfortable living their life wearing opposite sex clothing, or they want to do this, and they're a grown adult. I think, again, 99% of people are like, okay, whatever. You might not approve of it. You might not understand it, but it's like, okay, that person's an adult. If you want to live your life that way, if you want to identify as a chicken, put on a chicken costume every day and eat bird seed and run around and cluck, I think it's weird. I support your right to do it, though, right? I think it's strange. I don't understand it. I don't know why you're doing that, because you're a man. You're not a chicken. But you can do that. But then if you want to force me to say that you're a chicken, and you want to force me to treat you as a chicken, and you want to every time we refer to you, I'm supposed to say, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, and we understand this around the West when it comes to a concept such as religion.
Yes.
Right? We have freedom we have freedom of religion, freedom from religion. I'm a Christian. I have a right to my beliefs. I have a right to worship. I have a right to pray. I don't have a right to go around and force people to accept Lord Jesus as their savior, or to force people to believe that God exists under the threat of punishment or some type of coercion, or even attacking them and calling them names or trying to get them deplatformed if they don't agree with my religious views. When it comes to religion, everyone understands this. But now we have these new age pseudo-secular religions and ideologies which are creeping up into society. I've said before that we live in one of the most godless time periods ever in the West, but one of the most religious. And when I say religious, I'm not talking about traditional religion. I'm talking about the dogma and the way people are behaving. We basically have new blasphemy laws. We have new we have new heresy. The way people are treating others and calling others when they don't go along with this, it's reminiscent of the way religions used to be centuries ago, when things were, when people could be deeply, deeply intolerant and even willing to use threats or use violence to force people to convert or to attack non-believers. If there's a religious person who does that, you call that person a zealot. If not, oh wow, that person's an extremist. Yeah. This is someone who wants to force people to convert. This is someone who's willing to inflict violence upon people who don't go with their beliefs. And this is what you're now getting with some of these secular ideologies.
Would you say these are extremists by that definition then?
It is extreme. I'm not the extreme one. I'm normal. My beliefs are in line with on many things, like 90% of the globe's population. I have very few views that are like actually would be all that interesting in a sane world. Right? Like, there's nothing that I say out there that's really like, oh my gosh, wow, that's really out there. What I say are things that people would have deemed common sense 10 years ago, certainly 15 years ago. Even many people who would consider themselves more liberal or more progressive. Liberals and progressives 10 years ago were not trying to allow males to compete in female sports or trying to force some of these ideas or surgeries or hormone treatments on children. That wasn't even a conversation. Even the most progressive person would have been like, no, like if you're an adult, you can do what you want and I'd support your right to do that. But no, not children, right? That's a bad idea. Yeah. And now suddenly for the past few years, we're locked into this weird battle and debate, firstly about reality, and then secondly against what I would consider very basic morality and ethics. And I think there are certain lines being crossed, particularly when it comes to children. And those are lines that can't be crossed. That can't be tolerated.
You hit on the two things that I think are fundamental to all of this, is that basic reality is being called into question. You said this table, we can see it's blue. They try to tell you it's yellow. You say, if you don't say it's yellow, we're going to deplatform you, cancel, whatever, right? They're making you question basic reality or deny basic reality. The other thing they're doing is they're trying to alter your morals. And this is where I've been going with this whole, the way I see this whole hate speech thing, or what they're defining as being discriminatory, the way it's heading is that any moral value is on the road to be called hate speech or hateful. Because as long as you believe in morals, you believe there's a right and a wrong, and if you believe there's something wrong, they call that hateful. Mm-hmm. So what's the trajectory of that? The trajectory is going to be that the only thing that's acceptable is no morals whatsoever. And the only thing that's called evil is if you believe that morals exist.
Yes, I call this the inversion agenda. And I think
that's a good way to explain it. Tell us about that.
We're living in the age of inversion. Men are women, women are men, down is up is down, wrong is right, right is wrong.
Morality is immorality.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very dangerous place for a society and a culture to be. Now, I want to reiterate the point that I don't think that more than 10% of the population is on board with these ideas. I don't even think that many people are really aware of how far some of this stuff has gone, because unfortunately, oftentimes people don't pay attention to something until it somehow directly affects them, until it comes to their doorstep, until it affects their family or it affects their children. They're happy to just be ambivalent about it and kind of shrug their shoulders. So it can be a frustrating thing for someone who pays attention to society and culture and can kind of see the direction where things are going, and you can kind of spot trends early and go, okay, this idea is, it started out in fringe parts of academia, and then it's becoming in mainstream academia, and then it's going into the institutions, and then it's going into the schools, and so on and so forth. Okay, now it's in the movies, and it's in the TV shows, and it's everywhere. And you sound like a crazy person when you try to warn people about what's coming down the pipeline, right? If you go back 2.5 years ago to the 2 weeks to slow the spread,
Yeah.
those of us, including myself, who said this is not going to be 2 weeks. If you give these governments 2 weeks, we're not getting out of this for a freaking long time. This is a compliance ladder. If they can do this, they can make you do this. If they can make you do this, they can make you do that. Next thing you know, a year later, people are getting fired from their jobs for not wanting to take a certain injection.
And anyone said that was called a conspiracy theorist, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyone who tried to warn about this and say, hey, you're giving up too many of your freedoms, right? If you give them an inch, they're going to take a yard. If you give them a yard, they're going to take a mile. And you were called a conspiracy theorist. Fourth, people got browbeaten online and offline. Some people even got censored. And that is why people choose to self-censor. So I understand why people do it. The power is always with the people. And I wish people understood this. It's one of the strongest messages I try to put out there to individuals, but also to groups of people, which is that the power ultimately lies with you. Yes, you have mayors and governors and presidents and prime ministers and the weirdos in the WEF and our other unelected people who like to call themselves the elites. But they're less than 0.1% of the population. The power is always ultimately with the people. An individual, every day you make choices, right? Sure, there can be coercion, there can be incentives, there can be influence, but ultimately you are the one who makes your choices. And when you understand this and you take responsibility for it and you take accountability, it can be a little bit scary to begin with, but ultimately it's actually a very powerful and an empowering message, because you realize, okay, I have the power and control to exert over myself, and then therefore the people around me I can influence. And if you have a family, okay, if I get my house in order, I get my life in order, that'll help me get my family in order. If I get my family in order, that's part of a wider community, and that helps to get the community in order. A country is a collection of communities. And that's really the way I look at things. I look at things much more bottom up than top down. I think a lot of people feel that everything is top down, and it's just that whoever's at the top, they just say something and it goes, and we all must fall in line with it. And it's like, no, we don't have to. Not always. I don't think it's wise to be rebellious against everything and everyone for no reason. I'm not actually someone who's a naturally rebellious type. But if what is coming down from the top is wrong, either objectively or it's wrong morally or ethically, then rebellion becomes a duty, right? And we've seen this throughout history. We know that just because something is legal or mandated by the government doesn't mean that it's correct. Doesn't mean that it's moral. It doesn't mean it's good. You can think of the most heinous examples that led to the deaths of hundreds of millions of people over the last century alone in different regimes. Nazism, various forms of communism, different totalitarian regimes, genocides that have happened in different countries. Many of those were quote unquote legal. Nobody broke the law. In fact, if you went against it or you didn't go with it, you could have been the one who's technically breaking the law.
Right. They manipulated the law to make illegal things legal. That's
exactly.
Which is what we see them doing right now, ironically.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And yes, it's not on the same scale, and it hasn't had the same horrendous consequences. But we have to realize that we're not done with history. I think one of the big mistakes people make in the modern world is thinking that history is over. Like, we're done. This is it. Like, we're advanced. It's 2022. History's done. All that stuff in the 1900s and the 1800s and the going back. Yeah, that's history. Like, we're done. We're done with wars. We're done with plagues. We're done with famine. We're done. Like, we're advanced. We're smart. We're wise. And I wish that were true, but history is still going on. I imagine in the year 1910, people thought they were pretty advanced. and very morally sound, and they had their ethics together, and, science was booming. You think they saw that there's going to be 2 catastrophic world wars in the next few decades. There's going to be genocides of entire populations. Do you think they saw that coming? Of course not. And I don't say this to fearmonger. I don't like to fearmonger. I just want to remind people that human nature hasn't changed. We're the same human beings. The advantages we have are we have better technology and we have access to history. So let's use that history. Let's look around the globe. Let's look in history and look at atrocities and things that are going wrong and authoritarian governments and examples of tyranny and where things go wrong and go haywire. And let's learn from that. Let's say, hey, we have the capacity for this. That's dark. That's scary. Ooh, I don't like that. We don't want to recognize that. Let's make sure we don't do that again. Let's never have that again. Let's not go for those ideas again. Let's not put the collective above the individual. Let's not sacrifice human beings for some weird notion of the greater good. Let's not turn against our friends, our families, our neighbors. Let's not go along with the government and media propaganda all the time with no question at all. Let's ask questions. Let's think critically. And when we see something that's wrong, coming back to what I was saying initially, let's have the courage to put a hand up and say, wait, hang on. I have an issue with that.
That's profound stuff. And going back to what you were saying earlier about this pandemic of cowardice, I think that's definitely a huge part of it. People are afraid of being canceled or losing their jobs or whatever. I think there's also a lot of people, though, who just don't want to speak their beliefs because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to offend people.
It's fear.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
So what would you tell those people? Like, at what point do you have to push back and say, I don't agree with this, and these are my values, and this is where I stand?
I'll tell you the main pushback, because someone's going to be listening to this right now, and I can read their mind, and they're going to go, that's easy for you to say, Zuby. You're self-employed. You work for yourself. You've got means. You've got money. You don't have a normal job and kids and a mortgage and all these other things that normal people have. For someone who thinks that, what type of world, culture, and society do you want your children to inherit? Think about that. Do you want your children, if you stay silent, don't think about the consequences of speaking up. Think about the consequences of staying silent. If you don't like the way that your country has been trending for the past decade or the past 2 decades or the past 5 years, what do you think will happen if you stay silent and you refuse to get involved and you refuse to say no to things that are not good? Do you think that the next generation is going to be better off? Do you think that your kids are going to have more or less freedom? They're going to have less freedom. They're going to have less freedom of speech. They're going to have, there's going to be more coercion. There's going to be more authoritarianism. There's going to be more tyranny. So
right.
I understand, and I empathize with the, of course, I'm not here sitting saying, yeah, I want you to lose your job, or like, well, I don't want anyone to, put themselves at risk. But first of all, those fears are largely overblown. And secondly, the consequences of not speaking up, as I said, are in the long term far more severe. It's much easier to nip something in the bud than to let this monster grow to such a level and get so ingrained in so many institutions and so many aspects of society, and perhaps even in the law, where it gets to a point where even trying to challenge it is, if you think it's scary now, if you think it's difficult now, it'll be much, much more difficult 5 years from now, a decade from now, 20 years from now, and your children, our children, my future children are going to have to bear the consequences of that.
Zuby, fully agreed, man. Real profound stuff. Great having you on the show, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
One.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing the interview. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and share the video with others. Subscribe to King Channel TV.